Chapter 4 Arca Pharmaceuticals Headquarters, San Francisco. The room was dark, the computer monitor bright. It was 9 a.m. Zulu time and Sierra Leone time. Though it was a chilly January evening in Northern California, in Sierra Leone it was a hot day. Lee looked down like God at images Flynn's company, Orion Enterprises, piggybacked off Keyhole 18. Flynn himself was in the fancy company headquarters building in Alexandria, Virginia. Today, SL-58 was being field tested. Orion had administered 50 cc's of SL-58 to each operative, the dose calibrated to last at least 48 hours, well over the time it should take them to make their way from the diamond mine in the hinterland of hell to hell's own port, Freetown. The mine was very rich, the path to market incredibly dangerous. There were not one but two rebel armies camped out in the jungle, marauders living off terrified villagers, and hijacked convoys. So far, one convoy and 3 made it intact to Freetown. A 66% loss was unacceptable, even for the richest diamond mine in the world. The Amsterdam-based Diamond Consortium had hired Orion to provide security for the diamonds, and Flynn had promised the moon to the consortium in exchange for $1 million a trip. Considering the haul on each trip was worth roughly $500 million once the diamonds were cut and set, the consortium had agreed, but Orion had one chance. If this convoy went the way of the others, it could kiss the contract goodbye. Lee wasn't interested in diamonds or even the money, though he would get a substantial bonus if this convoy and successive convoys were successful. The bonus would help him speed up his plans. This was a trial run in another sense too. A state-controlled Chinese mining company had found a huge deposit of iridium, the largest in the world, in Burundi. No one else knew of the deposit. With access to plentiful iridium, China was guaranteed to be the world leader in microchips for the next 2 decades. The mine was even deeper in the hinterland, in the no-man's land, where artificial lines on maps meant nothing. If SL-58 turned out to be successful for Orion, it could be administered early to the Chinese troops, who had set up a convoy to take the mined iridium east to the Indian Ocean, then by ship to China. Lee's main monitor had shown the Orion convoy starting out at first light. 2 Unimogs in front and 2 more at the rear guarding the central security truck, carrying a titanium vault with 5 kilograms of uncut diamonds. Since the nuking of the Orapa diamond mine in Botswana the year before, diamonds were the most valuable commodity on Earth. 3 vehicles, including the armored truck carrying the diamonds, all heavily armed, each vehicle with a minigun firing 50 caliber bullets at the rate of 8,000 a minute. Flynn had said they were carrying more than 50,000 rounds of ammunition. In Nanjing, 50 members of the elite Flying Dragon Squadron were waiting, pending the outcome of today's trial. If it was successful, SL-58 would be administered, and in a month they would start accompanying trucks of iridium to the waiting ships. For now, it was Flynn's men who were being tested. Some ex-U.S. military and several South Africans familiar with the African bush. Each soldier had received an injection of SL-58 the previous evening. Orion's men had been told it was a benign, long-lasting amphetamine that would let them stay awake and alert for the 20-hour journey. Lee was sending everything to Beijing via long-burst encryption. It was an important trial. It was an important day. The first field test of the drug. So far, so good. The field doctor's report had been mundane, even boring, which Lee approved of. Boring was predictable. Boring was good. Lee had watched the recording of the convoy starting out at 5 a.m. local time. The trucks heading out precisely, well-timed and well-organized. The speed and precision of the soldiers at departure were visible, almost tangible. Lee wasn't a logistics expert, but he had some idea of what it took to get a convoy of 25 men going. They did everything at top speed, quick and efficient. While the men were loading the trucks, Lee had to check the monitor dashboard to make sure the recording wasn't somehow fast-forwarding. But it wasn't on fast-forward. Everything was in real time. The men were walking as fast as most men could run. Loading movements a blur. Flynn was watching in Virginia, observing the tactical situation. Lee watched with a scientist's eye, delighted with what he was seeing. It was as if the soldiers' movements were choreographed, worked out beforehand and rehearsed 1,000 times. It could have been on Broadway. However good Flynn's men were, they couldn't be that good. He was seeing the effects of SL-58. They moved fast and precisely, and were bristling with weaponry, but trouble was brewing. Lee switched every 5 minutes to IR and noted human-sized bodies in the jungle, starting about 100 meters from the staging area. Flynn had noted too and reported. The men were perfectly aware they were under observation. At first, the red dots could have been any large mammals, but their stillness over time as the convoy was marshaled and then set off could mean only one thing: rebel soldiers observing. Doubtless, the rebels were in radio contact with other soldiers along the route, the only road to Freetown. It was a well-known technique: attack convoys away from home base. Well, if they attacked the enhanced convoy, they were in for a nasty surprise. The orders were to barrel ahead. An ordinary convoy would take 3 or 4 days to get to Freetown, traveling between 15 and 20 miles an hour during the day over the badly rutted road, lagering at night. I don't know what that word means. Laagering. Sounds like beer, but anyway. This was to be a straight run with no rest stops, pissing in bottles, shitting in cans, eating MREs. These soldiers wouldn't need rest stops. All they needed after the injection was a minimum of 8,000 calories a day, and they could drive and fight nonstop for 48 hours. 20 hours was nothing. A 20-hour convoy run would guarantee an increase in profits of 300% for the Diamond Corporation and would represent a cash cow for Orion. But more important, it would be the first successful battlefield test run of SL-58. If it was successful, Flynn would be allowed to play with it for a year, during which time the Chinese would be producing it in industrial batches and injecting its soldiers. After a year of field trials through Orion, Lee would destroy the lab producing it, destroy the formula and the few scientists who knew of it, and would be exfiltrated from America bound for Beijing before the first bomb detonated in Milan's labs. Lee had read up on his African history. African battles were often won by sheer numbers. After the Battle of Isand Luana, Western forces knew they had to be overwhelmingly better armed to prevail. This was going to change the face of battle in Africa. Flynn had briefed him on the convoy. The Unimogs had FLIR to detect hostiles, ground-penetrating radar for mine detection with armored chassis. Each vehicle had side and top-mounted 50 cals, and below them, microwave blasters calculated to cook the hostiles the bullets didn't get. Lee wasn't a soldier, but even he was taken aback by the appearance of the convoy. You'd have to be insane to attack it. Of course, the Lord's army was almost by definition made up of insane soldiers, drugged up, recruited as children, and impervious to fear. The convoy took off fast and smooth. From the satellite images, it almost looked like a living organism. Lee knew that the vehicles were in constant contact, with monitors showing displays of braking and acceleration of each vehicle, allowing the distance between the trucks to be minimal. As they took off at dawn, the recorded IR images surrounding the camp scattered. A few red spots tried to run alongside in parallel, but soon gave up. The convoy was moving too fast. 40 miles west, a conglomeration of red spots broke up like an ant colony that had had a stick poked in it. They'd received word on the radio that the convoy was arriving, but they were thinking in old terms and were still setting up traps by the time the convoy shot past in tight and deadly formation. The next trap was set 100 miles farther west, where the road led through a steep valley, a classic ambush point. Lee smiled at the ant-like movements at the narrowest point. He didn't have to be a soldier to understand that, short of unleashing an Armageddon of bombs, they didn't stand a chance. The convoy would speed by them with nary a scratch on the armored sides of the Unimogs. This was going to work. He pressed a button. "Looking good," he said to Flynn. "Yeah, real good," was the reply. Flynn would watch every second, but Lee had work to do. He minimized the screen, reviewed some autopsy reports, then went for coffee. The canteen had just purchased a shipment of Blue Mountain Arabica, and it was delicious. He'd bring a box of the stuff with him when he left for China, which might be sooner than he thought. Back in his office, he gave a glance at the monitor, then frowned. A side monitor showed progress as a blue line on a detailed map of the terrain. They should have been a third of the way to their destination, but it looked more like halfway there. He punched in a query and stared at the answer in astonishment. The convoy was traveling at 60 miles per hour, an insane speed for heavy vehicles over rutted roads. Lee opened the screen but couldn't follow the individual vehicles behind the lead. The satellite image showed only a thick plume of dust rising high. All the contractors' enhanced intelligence and strength, all their state-of-the-art gear wouldn't help if one of the heavy vehicles toppled over. It would be like a wounded elephant, and the other trucks would have to establish a perimeter of defense while trying to winch the fallen truck upright. Word would spread fast, and soon they'd have 1,000 red rebels or Lord's army crazies shooting at them. Insane. He glanced at a side monitor showing data and blinked. The vehicles were speeding up. The speed was now 67 miles per hour. Flynn's cowboys were endangering the entire mission. He moved to link with the former general when he heard Flynn's booming voice, with a deep southern accent, fill the room from the speaker. His red face scowled from a small square on the bottom right-hand corner. "What the fuck is going on, Lee? I'm clocking these bastards at 70 miles per hour. The fuck are they doing? He was right. They were traveling at 72 miles per hour. Mr. Flynn, he replied coldly, deliberately omitting his usual deferential title of general. I have no idea what your men are doing, but they are running the risk of crashing the trucks at this speed. I see rebel activity 10 miles ahead. The road's in real bad shape there. If they crash there, they will be in major trouble. His IR monitor showed a mass of red lights under the tree canopy 10 miles ahead, invisible in the normal satellite images. They know that, Flynn growled. They're seeing what we're seeing. Then this recklessness is doubly inexcusable, Lee said coolly. Flynn didn't answer. The former general's breathing was loud in the room. He was a man who liked his pleasure at the table and in bed, and every time Lee had seen him over the course of the past 2 years, he'd been 10 pounds heavier and ever shorter of breath. Right now, his face was red and swollen on the monitor, a heart attack in waiting. Greedy Americans, Lee thought with disgust. Always more, like monstrous ticks, engorging themselves until they burst. You couldn't find a fat general in the entire People's Liberation Army. Jesus, Flynn rasped, what are they doing? Lee focused on the main monitor, unable to believe what he was seeing. Was something wrong with the satellite camera? No. The camera was showing events in real time, and what he and Flynn were seeing was the convoy slowing down at the choke point of the valley road. 50 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour, 20 miles per hour. Lee watched unbelieving as the convoy rolled to a stop in perfect synchronization. Flynn was shouting, Hardy, Rollins, come in. What the fuck are you doing? You're surrounded by hostiles. Do you have mechanical malfunction? Why are you stopping? A deep voice came over Lee's speakers, not speaking to Lee, but to Flynn. No, sir, no malfunction. We're just taking the fight to the enemy. The voice sounded super excited, panting. Lee remembered listening in on the radio reports at the beginning of the convoy's journey. The voices had been laconic and emotionless, fighter pilot voices, relating facts like automatons. Negative! Flynn was screaming. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Just take that damn convoy to Freetown. A click, no answer. Excited voices in the background, the sounds of men piling out. Lee didn't need the audio feed. What was happening was perfectly clear. The monitor showed the overhead feed, men spilling out of the front and back trucks. Lee knew nothing about military strategy, but even he knew that a stranded convoy, surrounded by hostiles, should be setting up a perimeter, hunkering down, guarding the shipment. Instead, the men poured out of their trucks and ran straight into the jungle, rifles to shoulders. One by one, the red points, like ants milling around an anthill, stopped. Whatever else they were, Orion's soldiers were excellent shots. 4 of the men had powerful, lethal tasers and were taking down rebel army members 5 at a time, mowing them down. But however crazy brave, however well-armed, however excellent shots they were, the Orion contractors were outnumbered several hundred to 1. The Orion contractors were easy to follow. even under the canopy. Their heat signature was significantly lower due to the body armor they wore. The first contractor fell 2 minutes into the battle, another a minute later. It was a massacre. The men fought hard, but for every rebel army crazy they killed, 50, 100 took his place. They were so outnumbered the rebels could have been armed with clubs, and Flynn's men would have eventually succumbed. Soon, all the Orion contractor IR signatures were still. Each contractor had a swarm of rebels around him, and Lee realized with a sick lurch to his stomach that they were being ripped apart. It had all happened so quickly, so unexpectedly, that there was silence at Orion headquarters. Then, what the fuck happened there? Clancy's rough voice screamed. What did they do? Why didn't they just ride on through as quickly as possible? Did your drug rob them of intelligence? What the hell did you give them? Lee had an idea what had happened. On the monitor, rebel army members were filing out from under the canopy onto the open road. Lee suppressed the urge to vomit. Several were prancing in the road, severed heads impaled onto their bayonets. They swarmed around the 2 trucks. The armored truck was impenetrable, but even if they could break into the back, the payload was in a titanium vault. It was safe from the marauders, but the diamonds were stuck on a road in the middle of the jungle, surrounded by heavily armed lunatics. They might as well have been on the backside of the moon. The drug was too strong. The soldiers' enhanced aggression overwhelmed their desire to complete the mission, which meant that SL-58 was unusable. Flynn was breathing heavily, and Lee wondered whether he was working his way up to a heart attack. They were looking down at a huge fortune in diamonds that was completely inaccessible. What was that? Flynn rasped. SL-58? Yes, Lee said. You get me SL-59, damn quick.